As we gather this evening, regardless of the hour or location, let us take a moment to reflect on a chapter of history often left unspoken. Amidst the allure of nobility and the expectation of unyielding strength, there exists a complex narrative concerning the physical vulnerabilities of those who don crowns. Birth defects and congenital ailments quietly navigated the lineage of many royal families, yet in an era steeped in the doctrine of divine right, acknowledging any imperfection in a monarch threatened to destabilize the very foundations of authority. Physicians murmured their observations discreetly, artists modified their portrayals, and official records conveniently overlooked ailments such as skeletal deformities or organ dysfunction. This inquiry is not intended as ridicule. Rather, it serves to remind us that behind every royal facade lies the fragility of the human condition, often burdened by health issues from birth. Remarkably, many of these sovereigns managed to lead with distinction despite their hidden afflictions. Born in 1452 and perishing in 1485, Richard III stands out as the last English king to die on the battlefield. Interestingly, his skeletal remains would later capture public interest, emerging from relative obscurity beneath a parking lot 5 centuries later. The narratives surrounding Richard are fraught with complexity. He is labelled a usurper and maligned as a child murderer by Tudor accounts, yet there exists an alternative perspective that paints him as a misunderstood reformer. However, one aspect of Richard's portrayal transcends even Shakespeare's imagined embellishments: his physical form. For centuries, Tudor propaganda depicted him as a hunchbacked villain, suggesting that his twisted body mirrored a pervasively corrupt soul. This moral rationale allowed audiences of the time to readily accept his vilification. Yet, archaeological discoveries in 2012 unearthed a more nuanced reality. Richard's remains revealed that he suffered from adolescent-onset scoliosis, manifesting as a subtle curvature of his spine rather than the grotesque deformities illustrated in Tudor art. Contemporary orthopedic evaluations indicate a high degree of curvature, likely between 70 to 90 degrees at its worst, sufficient to induce chronic pain but subtle enough that he could still engage in combat and governance. Remarkably, Richard III excelled in his military and courtly obligations despite his condition, participating in skirmishes and enduring political machinations right until his death at the Battle of Bosworth Field. With historical accounts detailing his fierce valor, nearly breaching the enemy ranks before succumbing, one must consider the broader implications of his condition. Did his adversaries know of his scoliosis? Most likely. Those in his inner circle, from tailors to attendants, undoubtedly would have been aware. Were they quick to exploit this knowledge? Certainly. Tudor historians exaggerated Richard's physical anomalies to frame him as a monstrous figure for political advantage. A crooked body, they claimed, was indicative of a crooked character in an era steeped in moral binaries. In addition to scoliosis, Richard's remains bore witness to the trauma of battle, with evidence of lethal blows to his skull, yet his condition was not hidden. In a time when discussions of physical ailments were often suppressed, Richard adapted to his affliction with a stoic silence. His scoliosis, possibly influenced by genetic predisposition or growth spurts, could not be treated in a meaningful way. He disguised it with tailored clothing, enduring the associated discomfort in silence. Richard III's brief reign lasted 2 years and ultimately ended in defeat, yet his legacy continues to resonate, symbolized by the very parking lot where his bones were discovered. His life and struggles inform a salient narrative, illustrating that in the pursuit of power and legacy, the burdens one carries, be they physical, political, or moral, are seldom acknowledged. The crown does not concern itself with the comfort of its bearer. It is the ability to rule that remains paramount. Charles II, born in 1630 and deceased in 1685, is often referred to as the Merry Monarch, a moniker reflecting his penchant for revelry and the pleasures of life during his reign. His days were filled with laughter, his nights with romantic escapades, yet the latter portion of his life was marred by a physical decline that drew attention to his reproductive failures. Despite his marriage to Catherine of Braganza enduring for 23 years, he fathered at least 12 illegitimate children while lacking any legitimate heirs, a circumstance that has ignited curiosity among historians. Rather than attributing this deficiency solely to Catherine's supposed infertility, contemporary endocrinologists have introduced a compelling narrative that centers on Charles himself. Measuring over 6 feet tall, which was particularly remarkable for his time, Charles possessed a lanky frame and exaggerated features, often depicted in flattering portraits that enhanced his notable jawline. Descriptions from his contemporaries reveal insights into his sporadic lethargy, vertiginous episodes, and a swarthy complexion, suggesting a potential underlying health issue, possibly a pituitary disorder akin to acromegaly. Acromegaly, although primarily recognized for its growth effects, can profoundly disrupt hormonal balance, including fertility. If Charles suffered from this condition from a young age, it could elucidate why his fervent efforts to establish a lineage ultimately yielded no legitimate offspring. The irony of his reputation as the royal stud belies a potentially tragic truth. His ineffectiveness in progeny production may have been a biological phenomenon beyond his control. This medical enigma was juxtaposed with the fortuitous fertility of his brother, James II, and later, Catherine of Braganza's apparent ability to conceive. Additionally, Charles endured various chronic health afflictions, including gout and kidney stones, culminating in a fatal stroke that claimed his life at the age of 54. Throughout his final days, medical practices of the era, often brutal and misguided, failed entirely to consider the implications of a malfunctioning pituitary gland. Consequently, this absence of legitimate heirs had impactful political ramifications that resonated throughout England, instigating a protracted succession crisis that nearly ignited civil strife and ultimately positioned James II on the throne. Such events spiraled into the Glorious Revolution of 1688, all rooted in the intricate interplay between personal health and political fate. Charles II, despite being celebrated for reinstating joy to the monarchy post-Cromwell, was tragically thwarted by a body that could not fulfill its most critical role, succession. The merry monarch navigated a life of levity, yet his hormonal afflictions remained an unyielding barrier to the legacy he yearned to establish. Subsequent historical narratives continue to unravel the complexities behind his reign and his tragic corporeal limitations, leaving a nuanced portrait of a ruler whose vitality belied an insidious personal struggle. Born in 1738 and passing away in 1820, King George III of Britain remains a figure of historical intrigue, often characterized by his loss of America and a descent into madness that has sparked extensive debate among modern historians and medical professionals alike. His mental health struggles, which have been synonymous with his reign, manifested in chaotic episodes marked by violent rages, hallucinations, and extended periods of confinement at Windsor, where his physicians relied on severe treatments, including blistering methods that did little to alleviate his condition. For generations, scholars have largely dismissed his profound deterioration as mere insanity, a narrative rooted in the tragic collapse of a monarch. However, beginning in the 1960s, a shift occurred as psychiatrists began to scrutinize George's medical history through a contemporary lens. This critical re-evaluation led to the development of the porphyria hypothesis, suggesting that George might have suffered from a rarer group of metabolic disorders that impact hemoglobin production in the blood, potentially explaining his myriad symptoms. Porphyria can induce severe abdominal discomfort, psychological instability, including paranoia and confusion, and a distinctive alteration in urine color, which is often a key indicator of the condition. Such episodes can be provoked by a variety of triggers, including stress and dietary choices, thus offering a genetic explanation for the king's affliction as it may have been hereditary, coursing through royal lineage. One of George's notable episodes occurred in 1788 at the age of 50, during which his mental state fractured dramatically. He became disoriented, agitated, and physically aggressive, even attempting an attack on the Prince of Wales. Accounts detail his urine turning dark and noted peculiar blue discolorations around his lips. Although he initially recovered, subsequent episodes followed in 1801, 1804, and an ultimately devastating relapse in 1810 that left him largely incapacitated, a shadow of his former self, relying on his son, the Prince Regent, to govern. The genetic implications of the porphyria theory gained significant traction when examining his descendants, including George IV, who displayed similar symptoms later in life, as well as other relatives with associated health issues. Nonetheless, this narrative is not without contention. Modern scholars have proposed alternative diagnoses such as bipolar disorder or late-onset dementia. Critics argue that the treatments prescribed to George, which often included arsenic or antimony, may have exacerbated his psychological plight rather than alleviated it, and some symptoms of his condition could arise not from metabolic issues but rather from medication side effects. What is indisputable is that George III faced profound biological challenges that may have had deep roots in his genetic makeup. Despite these struggles, he was often described as a virtuous man, loyal to his wife and dedicated to his responsibilities, with a genuine interest in agricultural and scientific advancement. He did not indulge in excessive drinking, did not pursue infidelities, and avoided war for personal gain. His aspirations for goodness, however, were undermined by his body's betrayal. His nearly 60-year reign outstripped that of any British monarch prior to Queen Victoria, yet for a significant portion of that time, he ruled in a fog of mental disarray, consumed by a mind that increasingly diverged from rational thought. The man who oversaw the loss of America similarly experienced a profound personal loss, perhaps etched into his very essence from birth. Born in 1665 and passing away in 1714, Queen Anne's life unfolded against a backdrop of personal tragedy and political consequence. Her reign is marked by a relentless cycle of motherhood that yielded no surviving heirs, as she endured a staggering 17 pregnancies, leading to profound physical and emotional suffering. The complexities of her existence are illustrated by her role as the last Stuart monarch, and the name associated with an architectural age that embodied both grandeur and tumult, and presided over the pivotal Act of Union in 1707, which forged the United Kingdom of Great Britain, all while grappling with debilitating health conditions. Modern medical historians have postulated various diagnoses that could account for her myriad afflictions, primarily focusing on the implications of an autoimmune disorder known as antiphospholipid syndrome. This condition likely explains her repeated miscarriages and the tragic fate of her children. Of the 5 born alive, only one, William, Duke of Gloucester, survived past infancy, dying allegedly from pneumonia at just 11 years old. Her physical turmoil extended beyond pregnancy complications. By her 30s, and was often reliant on a chair due to severe gout, which rendered her immobile, and by her 40s, her health deteriorated further, compounded by obesity and chronic ailments like eye infections and recurring fevers. The shadow of these afflictions loomed over her reign and the stability of the Protestant succession in Britain, inciting Parliament to enact the Act of Settlement in 1701, which secured the throne for the Hanovers instead of risking a potential Catholic restoration. Thus, the destinies of nations were shifted, not through Anne's decisions, but as a consequence of her body's betrayals. Despite the intense grief associated with her multiple pregnancies, 17 attempts intertwined with hope and despair, Anne's legacy did not solely rest with her failures to produce heirs. Instead, she is remembered for her enduring spirit in the face of relentless adversity and her impact on the architectural landscape of her time. Compounded by her personal challenges was a steadfast marriage to Prince George of Denmark, whose support was both compassionate and, at times, impotent against the trials they faced together. Their relationship, characterized by mutual sorrow, embodies the poignant yet often overlooked narratives that shape history. When queen and succumbed at the age of 49, she left no direct descendants, marking the end of the Stuart lineage and ushering in a new era under George I of Hanover. Her life serves as a somber reflection on the intertwining of personal struggles and national history, where the burden of a throne was, in part, redirected due to her body's cruel limitations. Anne's legacy is one of architectural grandeur and the profound impact of familial absence, an era shaped by a monarch who wished to fulfill her role as a mother, but whose body thwarted her aspirations. Edward VI, born in 1537 and deceased in 1553, represents a poignant chapter in English history. This young monarch, the long-awaited legitimate heir of Henry VIII, inherited a realm reshaped by his father's radical religious reforms and a legacy laced with complexities. The narrative surrounding his birth portrays a tale of royal promise. Heralded as a healthy child, the subsequent medical reality tells a starkly different story. His mother, Jane Seymour, succumbed to puerperal fever merely 12 days after childbirth, a likely consequence of a complicated labor that may have foreshadowed Edward's health struggles. Emerging into a world amidst the turmoil of the Protestant Reformation, Edward's early years were marred by persistent illness. Chronic ailments besieged him, and he was unusually susceptible to infections, possibly hinting at an underlying immunological vulnerability. Historians and modern immunologists speculate that Edward suffered from a primary immunodeficiency disorder, potentially inherited from his lineage, even suggesting possibilities of congenital syphilis introduced by Henry VII. Such theories, albeit circumstantial, provide a critical lens through which we can understand his fragile constitution. The tragic arc of his life culminated in 1552 with a severe bout of measles, which ultimately precipitated his decline, leading to what appeared to be a fatal case of tuberculosis. The physical toll of his illnesses earned him a grim fate. He succumbed at the tender age of 15, leaving behind a kingdom grappling with uncertainty and the weight of impending succession crises. Edward's endeavour to designate Lady Jane Grey as his successor, an audacious move bypassing his half-sisters Mary and Elizabeth, ignited conflicts that resulted in Jane's brief, tumultuous reign and the subsequent ascent of Mary. Had Edward lived longer, the contours of England's religious landscape might have drastically shifted. Yet, despite his intelligence and genuine devotion to Protestant causes, he was repeatedly thwarted by his own frail health. The potential for greatness in Edward's legacy lay in Protestant England, firmly established during his reign but ultimately overshadowed by the fragility etched into the very fabric of his existence. His life, a poignant reminder that congenital weaknesses manifest quietly, culminated not with grandeur, but in the diminished echoes of a cough, marking the end of the boy king's reign and heralding a succession marked by strife and uncertainty. Born in 1516 and passing away in 1558, Mary I of England, commonly referred to as Bloody Mary, remains a figure of considerable complexity and contradiction. Her reign is often overshadowed by the ruthless executions of Protestant dissenters that occurred under her authority. Yet, her personal narrative is one of profound struggle against physical and emotional ailments that likely originated from her earliest days in the womb. As the daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, Mary entered a world fraught with maternal loss, arriving after her mother had endured numerous miscarriages and stillbirths. From a young age, Mary was beset by health issues that defined her life. She grappled with severe menstrual issues, relentless headaches, and deep bouts of depression that alarmed those around her. These pervasive conditions were often labeled by contemporary physicians as melancholy or hysteria, terms that, while reflective of her torment, failed to encapsulate the full extent of her suffering. One of the most intriguing enigmas during her reign unfolded in 1555 when Mary, convinced she was expecting, experienced physical symptoms consistent with pregnancy, abdominal swelling and fetal movement sensations. Her hopes, however, culminated in profound disappointment as time passed without a child, leading to her public humiliation and the scorn of Europe, as she was left to contend with a phantom pregnancy, a condition known as pseudocyesis. Mary's experience was not merely an isolated incident. It reflected deeper issues. She faced repeated episodes of believing herself pregnant, periods of intense physical discomfort, and conditions signaling severe reproductive distress throughout her life. Some historians propose that Mary might have suffered from a pituitary tumor or polycystic ovary syndrome, while others speculate hereditary factors or chromosomal variations may have contributed to her myriad ailments. The ultimate consequence of her condition was a profound sense of loss, not just personally but politically, as her inability to produce an heir threatened the very Catholic restoration she endeavored to secure. In her later years, Mary married Philip II of Spain, driven by the hope of securing a Catholic heir, yet her body betrayed her hopes on multiple occasions, leading only to despair. Upon her death, likely due to complications related to ovarian or uterine cancer, the outcome was clear. Protestant Elizabeth, her half-sister, would ascend the throne, marking an irrevocable end to Mary's attempts to restore Catholicism in England. Mary's legacy is thus marked by a tragic irony. While she was known for her harsh policies, her personal story is threaded with the agony of a body that consistently failed her, paralleling the very violence her reign had inflicted on others. Her medical struggles, compounded by her failed marriage, deepened her depression and made the political landscape all the more precarious. As her physicians employed outdated treatments, bloodletting and herbal remedies, none could remedy her hormonal disorders or apparent chromosomal issues. By the time of her death at 42, with no heirs to carry forward her vision, Mary I left behind not just a reign characterized by infamy, but a poignant reminder of a woman perpetually at war with her own body. In understanding Bloody Mary, we glimpse the personal tragedies that coexist with the historical narrative of her reign, a confluence of suffering and power forever intertwined. Born in 1566 and passing away in 1625, King James VI of Scotland, who later became James I of England, stands out as a complex figure in the history of British monarchy. He was an author of significant treatises regarding witchcraft and the divine right of kings, despite grappling with physical disabilities that defined much of his life. Descriptions from his contemporaries portray him as having weak legs and an awkward gait, leading courtiers to tactfully overlook these attributes. His challenges extended to communication. A tongue apparently too large for his mouth resulted in difficulties with clarity, compelling him to rely on dictation for much of his correspondence due to tremors in his hands. These physical impairments were likely a result of complications during birth, possibly linked to oxygen deprivation that Mary, Queen of Scots, suffered during labor. Modern analysis suggests these symptoms could align with cerebral palsy, indicating lifelong difficulties with coordination and speech, coupled with pronounced sensory sensitivities. Notably, while external perceptions often painted James as weak or effeminate, he astoundingly surmounted these preconceived limitations throughout his reign, navigating a landscape characterized by political turbulence and religious strife. Despite his disabilities, James ruled Scotland effectively from a young age and later united the crowns of Scotland and England in 1603. His contributions to the monarchy were formidable. He commissioned the King James Bible and authored influential writings on governance and theology. His personal life added another layer of complexity. Although his marriage to and of Denmark was marked by emotional distance, his heartfelt attachments to male courtiers, such as Robert Carr and George Villiers, sparked much debate regarding their nature. whether romantic, platonic, or indicative of the intense friendships prevalent among men of the Renaissance. James's reign was not devoid of controversy. Many at the English court regarded him with disdain, deriding his physicality and mannerisms. However, rather than allowing these jibes to undermine his position, he exhibited remarkable political savvy, solidifying his power in an era rife with threats, including plots against his life. Over time, he adapted to his physical limitations, learning to delegate and reconcile his intellect with his bodily shortcomings. By the time of his death at 58, attributed to complications such as kidney disease and potential stroke, he had established a unified kingdom marked by significant cultural and religious developments. The legacy James left behind, a testament to the divine right of kings and the possibility of effective governance despite personal challenges, remained significant. His life serves as a complex narrative that challenges the traditional expectations of strength within royal lineage, showcasing that true power can manifest in myriad forms, regardless of physical constraints. William III, born in 1650 and passing in 1702, stands as a fascinating figure in history, a Dutch prince who ascended to the English throne amid the complexities of the late 17th century. His reign was marked by a tenacious struggle against King Louis XIV of France, a conflict that spanned Europe and ultimately secured the Protestant succession in England. Yet, behind his political endeavors lay a profound personal battle. William suffered from severe asthma, a chronic condition that plagued him throughout his life. This ailment manifested itself tragically, often leaving him gasping for breath during crucial council meetings and military campaigns, while at times confining him to bed. Contemporary descriptions of William illustrate a man of diminutive stature, often thought to have suffered from kyphosis, a congenital curvature of the spine which may have stemmed from childhood ailments, including rickets or pneumonia. His frailty was compounded by the loss of his mother to smallpox when he was merely 10 years old, thus shaping a life marked by illness. Despite these physical limitations, William assumed command of armies, leading fierce engagements against the French and orchestrating an ambitious invasion of England in 1688, as well as a notable campaign at the Battle of the Boyne in 1690. His physicians, in an era devoid of effective treatments for asthma, resorted to bloodletting and herbal remedies, which brought him little relief. The reality for William often meant sleepless nights, propped upright in an armchair, as lying flat provoked further distress. William's physical ailments inevitably influenced his public persona. While he sought to govern effectively, he was often perceived as aloof and unapproachable, a Dutch Protestant figure whose demeanor and health issues failed to endear him to the English populace. Rumors circulated regarding his close relationships with male favorites, provoking further discontent amidst his subjects. Nevertheless, William's impact on the constitutional landscape of England was significant. Alongside his wife, Mary II, he established a framework that curtailed the powers of the monarchy while reinforcing the authority of Parliament. Much of his rule was consumed by the struggle against France, leading the Grand Alliance in efforts to counter the expansive ambitions of Louis XIV. William's life met an untimely end at the age of 51 when a fall from his horse, triggered by a stumble over a molehill, resulted in a broken collarbone. Complications ensued, potentially exacerbated by pneumonia or a pulmonary embolism, leading to his swift demise. The reaction from his detractors, notably the Jacobites, was one of scornful celebration, as they raised toasts in mockery of the little gentleman in black velvet whose life had been fraught with physical challenges. William III's legacy is a testament to resilience. He ruled despite crippling asthma and a crooked stature, steering the course of nations and engaging in warfare while his health faltered. History, it seems, is often indifferent to personal afflictions, focusing instead on the broader strokes of influence and consequence woven throughout the fabric of time. Born in 1905 and passing away in 1919, Prince John Charles Francis remains a largely overlooked figure in the annals of British monarchy, a tragic reminder of the rigid constraints of his time. As the youngest of King George V and Queen Mary's 6 children, John initially appeared healthy. However, at 4 years old, he began to exhibit troubling symptoms, seizures that pointed to a diagnosis of epilepsy. In the early 20th century, this condition carried a heavy social stigma, often associated with madness and perceived moral inadequacies. In the Victorian context, where the royal family prioritized public image and impeccable decorum, John's health issues posed a considerable dilemma. The seizures became increasingly severe, characterized by grand mal episodes that rendered him disoriented and fatigued. Alongside these seizures, John exhibited developmental delays and communication challenges that, in hindsight, suggest traits of autism spectrum disorder. Affectionate and gentle by nature, he was deemed unfit for the public demands of royal life, prompting the family's decision to sequester him away from the mainstream royal narrative. Thus, John was relocated to Wood Farm, a secluded cottage on the Sandringham estate, where he was cared for by his devoted nanny, Charlotte Lulla Bill. His isolation deepened as he was rarely mentioned in court communications and effectively edited from the family's collective memory. As the years passed, his health deteriorated, and the frequency of his seizures intensified. Photographs from his later years portray a boy who radiates warmth yet is starkly disconnected from the formality of royal life. John's life came to a tragic end in 1919 at the tender age of 13 following a particularly severe seizure. The official notification of his death was terse, only stating that he had died suddenly. In her private reflections, Queen Mary confided that his death brought her great relief, a statement that has cast a long shadow over her legacy. While this lamentation can be interpreted as a confession of maternal love overshadowed by the harsh realities of royal obligation, it remains a profoundly complex acknowledgement of the era's eugenic anxieties and the royal family's compulsion to maintain an image of perfection. Historians have speculated various origins for John's epilepsy, including possible hereditary connections to the haemophilia prevalent among Queen Victoria's descendants, though conclusive evidence remains elusive. Others point to potential structural brain abnormalities or genetic syndromes. Perhaps most striking is how John's disabilities rendered him effectively invisible. He was shielded from public scrutiny, not out of malice but from a deeply ingrained societal shame. Prince John never attained the roles of ruler or statesman. His existence was confined to a quiet cottage, embraced by his nanny and only occasionally graced by his mother's visits. After his passing, he languished in obscurity, only to be rediscovered by historians decades later. His final resting place at Sandringham became an echo of a life overshadowed by stigma. The notion that his disabilities constituted a personal failing is a misunderstanding of their nature. They were inextricably tied to his biology. In the year of his birth, a royal's destiny was irrevocably dictated by societal perceptions, leaving John a lost prince whose narrative resurfaced only after silence had become unbearable. Born in 1762 and passing away in 1830, King George IV of the United Kingdom is often remembered as a figure marked by indulgence, affectionately dubbed the Prince of Pleasure. His legacy is built upon notable achievements including the construction of the exquisite Brighton Pavilion, yet it is overshadowed by his later years of excess and physical decline. George's considerable girth and flamboyant display of fashion, including his use of corsets, illustrate a man entrenched in contradiction. What often captivates historians is not solely his opulent lifestyle, but the underlying complexities that fueled his transformation from a striking young man into a morbidly obese monarch. As a baby, George was an impressive 9 pounds, which stood out significantly during the 18th century, and he continued to grow throughout his life. His youth was characterized by tall stature and charm that garnered admiration, yet by his 50s, he was beset by severe obesity and health complications including gout and addiction to opiates. This marked shift has led scholars to investigate whether his deterioration stemmed purely from lifestyle choices, or if a more profound biological root was at play. In recent examinations of medical documents and contemporaneous portraits, a diagnosis of Cushing's syndrome has been postulated. This hormonal disorder typically results from a tumor affecting the adrenal or pituitary glands and elicits symptoms ranging from significant weight gain and diabetes to profound psychological instability, all of which George exhibited. His later life was further complicated by tragic personal relationships. His marriage to Caroline of Brunswick in 1795 faltered and produced only one child, Princess Charlotte, who tragically died in childbirth in 1817. Although George had numerous extramarital affairs, it is notable that he had no confirmed illegitimate heirs, a striking anomaly given his reputed veracity and resources. Evidently, the hormonal imbalances suggested by his medical conditions may have also played a role in his lack of fertility. Throughout his life, George was subjected to a range of contemporary medical treatments, from bloodletting to various opiate derivatives, ultimately leading him to an addiction that exacerbated both his physical and mental health challenges. By the time he ascended to the throne in 1820 after serving as Prince Regent since 1811 due to his father's insanity, he was already battling severe health crises, secluding himself at Windsor as he grappled with paranoia and discomfort. His attendance at public functions was marked by specially tailored corsets as he struggled against the weight of his own body, ultimately succumbing to heart failure and liver disease at the age of 67. While the assertion of congenital origins for his condition is speculative, it remains a reasonable hypothesis. If indeed he suffered from a pituitary tumor or adrenal malfunction from early life, it could elucidate the gradual manifestation of his myriad health issues. While his lifestyle choices were undoubtedly detrimental, they may have compounded an intrinsic biological disorder. The ramifications of George IV's legacy extend far beyond his immediate reign. His daughter's premature death resulted in the crown passing to his brother, William IV, and later to his niece, Victoria, ushering in a new era. Thus, the Victorian age, with its distinct character, began partially as a consequence of George's inability to secure a viable heir. George IV's multifaceted legacy paints a portrait of a monarch who transcended mere extravagance. He became a symbol of the complexities of human experience, living lavishly yet struggling against a backdrop of physical tribulations. He may have reshaped the British monarchy's cultural image, yet his later years echo a sobering reminder of corporeal excess and the unseen struggles coursing through his life. The Prince of Pleasure ultimately transformed into the King of Pain, with the shadows of an undiscerning metabolism lurking behind his elaborate facade. Amelia, born in 1783 and deceased by 1810, stands out as the youngest and most cherished daughter of King George III. Her loss to tuberculosis, a disease that haunted her family, shattered her father's already fragile psyche. Amelia was 15 years the junior of her nearest sibling, a delightful surprise in an expansive royal family. Her charm made her a favorite of King George III, whose affection for her illuminated her formative years. However, as she approached adulthood, ominous signs of illness began to manifest. Persistent coughs, feverish nights, inexplicable weight loss, and chronic exhaustion marked her late teenage years. By 1798, her condition had deteriorated significantly, and by 1810, she was on the brink of death. The culprit was revealed to be consumption, a relentless variant of tuberculosis, the scourge of millions during the 18th and 19th centuries. Tuberculosis targets the lungs, leading to a gradual decline characterized by relentless coughing, blood expectoration, and, ultimately, respiratory failure. The contagious nature of TB offers little solace, as the degree of susceptibility differs widely among individuals. While some remain untouched by the disease, others, like Amelia, succumb rapidly. Contemporary immunologists suggest that genetic predispositions significantly inform one's vulnerability to the tuberculosis bacterium. If Amelia inherited a less robust immune system, perhaps tied to the same genetic factors contributing to her father's mental struggles, her fate was sealed from the outset. Desperation filled Amelia's years as she sought various remedies. Her journeys took her to Weymouth for fresh sea air, accompanied by attempts at mineral therapies, specialized diets, and warmer climates. Yet, in the pre-antibiotic era, tuberculosis was akin to a death sentence for those unable to withstand its assault, and Amelia's body proved incapable of resistance. The emotional toll of her illness compounded her suffering. She found herself in love with a royal equerry, Charles Fitzroy, but could not marry due to the stringent protocols that governed royal unions. Instead, she languished, yearning for a life beyond her gilded prison. Upon her death in November 1810 at the tender age of 27, the impact on her father was profound. George's intermittent mental health issues had already marred his reign, but Amelia's passing precipitated a total collapse from which he never emerged. His remaining years were spent in the gloom of mental disconnection, wandering the halls of Windsor Castle, shrouded in a purple robe, devoid of the life that once electrified his spirit. The ripple effects of Amelia's demise reached into the line of succession as well. Her father's incapacitation paved the way for the Prince of Wales to ascend as Prince Regent, marking the dawn of the Regency era, a defining moment for early 19th century British society. In retrospect, Amelia's struggles with tuberculosis may not have stemmed solely from exposure but appeared to have deep roots in genetic frailty. Although she did not inherit the disease itself, the likelihood of a genetic predisposition to weakened immunity could render her condition fatal. She was interred at Windsor, with her father too far removed from reality to attend her funeral. Virginia, her final act of love, she left him a ring containing a lock of her hair, which he cherished until his demise a decade later. Thus, Princess Amelia never ruled, never wed, and tragically never attained the life of her dreams. With her passing in her 20s, the kingdom faced an irrevocable loss. Tuberculosis had claimed her lungs, and the fateful hand of genetics had quite possibly orchestrated her tragic end. Born in 1853 and passing away just 30 years later, Prince Leopold of the British royal family stands as a poignant figure whose life embodies the often harrowing intricacies of genetic inheritance within European royalty. His condition, hemophilia, a bleeding disorder resulting from a deficiency in clotting factors, transformed what should have been a vibrant childhood into a landscape marked by peril and suffering. Leopold, the youngest son of Queen Victoria, was a haemophiliac, representing the first confirmed case within the British monarchy, albeit not the last. This genetic disorder, particularly haemophilia A, is predominantly transmitted through the X chromosome, predominantly affecting males while females may remain asymptomatic carriers. Queen Victoria herself carried the gene, unwittingly passing it to multiple offspring, including Leopold as well as her daughters, Alice and Beatrice, thereby disseminating haemophilia throughout European royal families, from Russia to Spain and Germany, akin to a latent genetic threat. Prince Leopold's formative years were defined by an unrelenting cycle of injury and anxiety. The slightest bruise had the potential to instigate prolonged internal bleeding, creating an atmosphere of fear that loomed over his each and every movement. He endured severe joint hemorrhages, leading to chronic pain and physical debilitation, rendering him reliant on a cane by the time he reached adulthood, a tragic fate dictated by his condition. In her anxiety over losing him, Queen Victoria restricted his freedoms, barring him from vigorous activities, travel, and aspirations of a military career, unlike his brothers. Nonetheless, Leopold was a man of intellect and artistic inclination, frustrated by the limitations imposed upon him. He pursued higher education at Oxford, became a patron of the arts, and eventually secured his mother's reluctant approval to marry Princess Helena of Waldeck and Pyrmont, with whom he had 2 children, Alice and Charles Edward. Tragically, Leopold never had the opportunity to meet his son. In 1884, at the age of 30, Leopold's life was abruptly cut short after a minor fall during a visit can lead to a fatal brain hemorrhage, an all too common outcome for someone with hemophilia. Unlike those without such a condition, a seemingly innocuous mishap could prove fatal, as the medical knowledge of the time offered scant solutions to his affliction. The reality was stark. One bled until death, or, with some luck, the bleeding subsided. Leopold's hemophilia, a hereditary mutation embedded in every cell following conception, was a defining factor that influenced not only his own existence, marked by seclusion, agony, and an untimely demise, but also the fates of his relatives and descendants scattered across Europe. The most notorious impact of Queen Victoria's hemophilia lineage was seen in Alexei, the son of Tsar Nicholas II of Russia and Alexandra, Victoria's granddaughter. The urgency surrounding Alexei's condition and the ensuing desire for a cure facilitated the rise of Rasputin, whose influence arguably contributed to the deteriorating legitimacy of the Romanov dynasty and played a role in the precipitating events of the Russian Revolution. Ultimately, Leopold's life, characterized by pain and constraint due to an inherited blood disorder, is a microcosm of the complex repercussions of genetic inheritance that transcends borders and influences historical trajectories, reminding us that the caprices of a genetic mutation can reverberate through power structures with relentless and indifferent force. Born in 1857 and passing away in 1944, Beatrice, the youngest daughter of Queen Victoria, exemplified the complexities of royal familial ties and the burdens they often entail. Closely bound to her mother throughout her life, Beatrice married Prince Henry of Battenberg in 1885, a union born more of familial duty than romantic desire. Initially, Queen Victoria resisted this match, fearing the loss of her cherished companion, who had taken on the roles of both secretary and emotional aid. Ultimately, she acquiesced, stipulating that the couple remain at her side. The couple welcomed 4 children, 3 sons and a daughter, yet the shadow of hemophilia, an affliction that had claimed her brother Leopold, loomed heavily over Beatrice's lineage. Although Beatrice herself did not suffer from the disorder due to her status as a carrier, her dual X chromosomes provided her with a healthy gene. She passed the defective gene to her offspring. This led to tragic consequences. Her sons, Leopold and Maurice, grappled with hemophilia, with Leopold enduring repeated health crises and Maurice tragically dying in World War I before the condition could take its toll. The family's legacy of hemophilia did not end there. Her daughter, Victoria Eugenie, known as ENA, married King Alfonso XIII of Spain, where the genetic malady further claimed lives, culminating in a national scandal that unfairly tarnished ENA's reputation. This hereditary illness played a pivotal role in shaping the political landscape of Europe, contributing to the upheaval of the Spanish monarchy in 1931. Beatrice's life, spanning both world wars and the loss of several kin, saw her engage in the historical task of editing her mother's diaries, a literal carving out of narratives to reshape Victoria's legacy. However, no amount of editorial control could mask the profound impact of the hemophilia gene she bore. Caught in the intricate web of heredity within royal bloodlines, Beatrice's role as a carrier echoes through history, revealing how such seemingly invisible afflictions can resonate powerfully within generations, intertwining personal hardship with the broader strokes of monarchy. Though her life may have been lived quietly, the legacy of hemophilia she carried remained a loud and persistent thread in the tapestry of royal histories, illustrating the intricate dance between lineage, duty, and the relentless hand of genetics in shaping lives. Born in 1841 and passing in 1910, Edward VII, often referred to as the Playboy Prince, embarked on an unexpectedly long journey to the throne, waiting 60 years to assume kingship. His life was characterized by Victorian scandal, marked by numerous mistresses and significant gambling debts. Over time, some contemporaries and historians have speculated that he faced learning challenges that profoundly influenced his worldview. Known as Bertie among family, he was the firstborn son of Queen Victoria, destined to be heir since birth. However, he did not embody the scholarly ideal that his father, Prince Albert, sought for him. From a tender age, Bertie encountered difficulties in reading, writing, and maintaining focus, an experience that left his tutors despondent. They describe him as backward and inattentive, labels that in the context of Victorian England encompassed a spectrum of meanings, from mere lack of effort to possibly genuine cognitive differences. Prince Albert crafted a demanding educational regimen aimed at developing Bertie's intellect, filled with countless hours of study, diverse tutors, and incessant evaluations. Yet this approach proved counterproductive. Bertie loathed the process, often resisted, and consistently failed to fulfill the lofty expectations set before him. Contemporary educational psychologists poring over historical accounts suggest he might have experienced conditions such as dyslexia or ADHD, which rendered conventional academic pursuits particularly challenging. The disappointment of his parents was profound, with Albert harboring resentment towards Bertie, especially after the prince's untimely death in 1861, which Victoria mistakenly aligned with her son's perceived shortcomings. Her grief transformed into a prolonged estrangement from Bertie, who found himself excluded from significant political engagements for decades. In response to these challenges, Bertie, like many individuals in similar predicaments, sought alternative avenues to achieve success. He cultivated a charisma that made him charmingly sociable and effortlessly stylish, becoming a connoisseur of diplomacy through the art of social interaction. While he struggled with treaties and Latin, he had an exceptional talent for remembering faces and details of conversations, enabling him to excel in social settings. His romantic liaisons became the stuff of legend, with names like Lily Langtry and Daisy Warwick frequently attached to his narrative. He reveled in a lifestyle marked by extravagant dining, extensive travel, and perennial indulgence, all while awaiting the moment when he could finally ascend to the throne following his mother's death in 1901. By the time he became king at the age of 59, Edward's reign, though brief at 9 years, brought about an unexpected effectiveness. He navigated the intricacies of European politics through personal relationships rather than bureaucratic documentation. He played a crucial role in negotiating the Entente Cordiale with France and sought to enhance relations with Russia, all while projecting an image of a modern and culturally attuned Britain. Ultimately, we are left with the question: were Bertie's childhood struggles rooted in a congenital learning difference, or were they simply the result of a disconnect between his personal inclinations and the rigid educational expectations of his time? The answers remain elusive. The concepts of dyslexia and ADHD would not enter the medical vernacular until decades later. What is clear, however, is that Bertie Adept compensated for his challenges, harnessing his social intelligence and exceptional memory as formidable strengths. In stepping away from Prince Albert's intellectual legacy, he created a unique kingship characterized by connection and an innate understanding of human nature, qualities that transcended the limitations of any formal education. Upon his death in 1910, from bronchitis and heart failure at the age of 68, Edward VII left behind a more stabilized Europe and a monarchy that had embraced modernization, a testament to the myriad forms in which intelligence can manifest. The once considered slow student emerged as a monarch with an unparalleled insight into the human condition. one that no academic textbook could ever impart. Born in 1744 and passing away in 1818, Queen Charlotte of Great Britain stands as a remarkable figure in the annals of British history. As the spouse of George III, she was the mother of 15 children and occupied a central role in court life for decades. Charlotte's legacy has recently become a subject of medical speculation, particularly regarding potential genetic disorders that may have plagued both her and her descendants. This genealogical inquiry is particularly concerned with the health issues manifested among her children, many of whom displayed alarming symptoms consistent with various hereditary conditions. Among her progeny, notable instances of ill health included George, who struggled with obesity that may have stemmed from a condition akin to Cushing's syndrome, and Princess Amelia, who succumbed to tuberculosis, perhaps exacerbated by immune dysfunction. Frederick, Duke of York, faced chronic dropsy and died at a young age, while several other offspring experienced chronic ailments or, tragically, passed before adulthood. The nuanced question arises for historians: was this merely a reflection of the statistical likelihood of illness in large families of the era, or might genetics have played a substantial role, rooted in either parental lineage? George III himself suffered from an enigmatic illness, possibly porphyria, a condition that has been widely scrutinized, yet Charlotte's potential genetic contribution has been less rigorously examined. This oversight partly stems from her own less dramatic health signs, and the inadequacy of medical records for queens compared to those of kings. However, Charlotte did exhibit symptoms indicative of possible metabolic issues, including nervous disorders characterized by anxiety and physical distress. As she aged, these episodes intensified, compounded by chronic digestive troubles and bouts of confusion, even while she maintained her royal responsibilities. Some medical historians suggest that Charlotte may have had a milder variant of porphyria, which could imply she passed on susceptible genes to her children, exacerbating the severity of their conditions when combined with George's unknown genetic predispositions. This theory gains traction in light of Charlotte's family background, the House of Mecklenburg-Strelitz, known for consanguineous marriages which could have concentrated rare genetic disorders within their lineage. Charlotte, born into a minor German principality, married George III at the tender age of 17, selected for her royal blood and Protestant faith, yet devoid of prior acquaintance or even fluency in English, all while contending with the court's relentless social expectations. Enduring harsh scrutiny over her looks, a phenomenon exacerbated by her distinctive but unflattering features, Charlotte found herself navigating a high-stakes environment focused heavily on aesthetic value. Despite these pressures, she was an intelligent and cultured woman, passionate about botany, music, and the arts. Charlotte patronized composers like the young Mozart and cultivated one of Europe's most distinguished botanical collections, contributing positively to the cultural landscape of her time. The bond between Charlotte and George III appears to have begun as one of genuine affection, further binding them through their considerable progeny. Yet, the toll of George's mental health challenges strained this relationship. During his episodes of insanity, he sometimes failed to recognize Charlotte, prompting her to take on the dual role of supportive spouse and caretaker, navigating the burdens placed upon her by both the monarchy and family affairs. Charlotte's life culminated in 1818, 2 years before George's death. Her final years were marked by health struggles that echoed her earlier complaints, intensifying under the weight of age and familial responsibilities. She lived to the age of 74, reflecting the remarkable endurance of her character during a tumultuous period. Her legacy resonates through the many European royal houses descended from her children, carrying both the gifts and burdens of their genetic heritage. The complexities of inheritance, both beneficial and detrimental, remain a poignant reminder of her multifaceted nature. Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz exemplified a steadfast queen, marked by resilience through her trials, embodying the intricate tapestry of biological destiny and royal duty, and left an indelible mark that continues to influence royal lineage to this day. Born in 1421 and assassinated in 1471, King Henry VI of England stands out in history as a monarch marked by profound contradiction and tragedy. Ascending to the throne at merely 9 months of age, he inherited vast realms due to his father's military achievements and the Treaty of Troy. This premature accession deprived him of a conventional childhood, forcing upon him the mantle of kingship long before he possessed the comprehension requisite for such a role. Crowned twice before he could walk, he was hailed as divinely ordained to govern 2 kingdoms, a heavy burden that foreshadowed the complexities of his reign. As he transitioned into adulthood, Henry exhibited a temperament unusually tender for a medieval king. His apparent distaste for warfare, preference for prayer over political maneuvering, and abhorrence of violence rendered him ill-suited for the turbulent landscape of 15th century England. While these attributes alone do not denote mental illness, by 1453, at age 31, he suffered a significant psychological breakdown, resulting in a state of catatonia that left him unresponsive for over a year. This debilitating episode coincided with a critical juncture in English history, as the nation faced escalating internal strife and significant losses in the 100 Years' War. During Henry's incapacitation, his wife Margaret of Anjou gave birth to their sole heir, Edward of Westminster, who would grow to embody the hopes and anxieties of the Lancastrian faction. Yet Henry's failure to recognize his own child underscored a devastating disconnect between his royal duties and his personal state, marking both a familial tragedy and a political quandary. The power dynamics shifted during his absence, with Richard, Duke of York, taking the reins of authority as Lord Protector, effectively steering the throne away from Lancastrian control and igniting the rivalries that would culminate in the Wars of the Roses. Henry's eventual recovery in 1455, resembling awakening from a deep slumber, failed to reverse the political turmoil that had intensified in his absence, making reconciliation with the fractious factions impossible. This precipitated a civil war that claimed thousands of lives and irrevocably altered the fabric of English monarchy. Henry's subsequent years were punctuated by further episodes of mental disturbance, ultimately leading to his deposition in 1461. Captured and briefly restored only to suffer further defeats, his reign concluded tragically at the Tower of London in 1471, following the death of his son, Edward, during the battle. Officially, his demise was attributed to melancholy, yet many suspect foul play orchestrated by rival factions seeking to eliminate any remnant of Lancastrian legitimacy. Modern psychiatric analyses suggest a variety of potential diagnoses for Henry's afflictions, ranging from catatonic schizophrenia to severe bipolar disorder, with a hereditary component possibly linked to his maternal grandfather, Charles VI of France, known for his own madness. This genetic predisposition, coupled with the environmental stresses of his early life, created a perfect storm for the emergence of his debilitating mental illness. Henry VI's gentle disposition, steeped in piety, contrasted starkly with the brutal demands of kingship in a tumultuous political climate. His incapacity fostered a leadership vacuum, exacerbating civil unrest and leading to the decline of the Plantagenet dynasty, eventually supplanted by the Tudors following Richard III's defeat at Bosworth Field. In portraiture, Henry's visage reflects a benign, almost ethereal quality, often depicted holding a book rather than wielding weaponry, a testament to a man more suited to scholarly pursuits than the bloody realities of kingship. His tragic narrative concludes within the shadowy confines of the Tower, where he was likely murdered, his body briefly displayed before being interred at Chertsey Abbey. Though revered posthumously by loyalists, he was never canonized, embodying the complexities of inherited mental illness that shaped not only his personal fate but the course of English history. The legacy of Henry VI, entwined with the echoes of his grandfather's madness, continues to inform our understanding of the intersection between mental health and monarchy, revealing a poignant reminder of how psychological afflictions can ripple through generations and transform the destiny of nations. Born in 1796 and passing away in 1817, Princess Charlotte of Wales represented not only the heir to the British throne but also the aspirations of a nation weary of royal scandals. The daughter of George IV, then Prince Regent, and Caroline of Brunswick, Charlotte captured the hearts of the public, presenting a stark contrast to her parents' notorious lifestyles. Her marriage to Prince Leopold of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld in 1816 was met with widespread jubilation, and her subsequent pregnancy in 1817 seemed to herald a new era for the monarchy, one that could restore its dignity marred by previous excesses. However, this hope turned to despair on November 5, 1817, when Charlotte went into a protracted labour at Claremont House. For over 50 hours, her body betrayed her, illustrating the harsh limitations of medical understanding at the time. Sir Richard Croft, her physician, adhered to the obstetrical conventions of the era, advocating for a hands-off approach despite the evident complications. Charlotte was only 21 and had appeared healthy, yet something was critically amiss. As modern obstetricians have deduced, various factors could have contributed to the obstructed labor, such as fetal positioning problems or a possible disproportion between her pelvis and the size of the child. The labor culminated in tragedy. Her baby boy, robust yet stillborn, passed away due to the stresses of an extended labor. Initially, Charlotte seemed to recover, allowing for brief moments of interaction with her attendants. However, the unforeseen onset of massive hemorrhaging soon robbed her of life, a devastating outcome prevalent in an age lacking blood transfusions or comprehensive knowledge of obstetric complications. Charlotte's untimely demise sent ripples of grief throughout Britain, evoking an outpouring of mourning unheard of for recent royal losses. The nation collectively recognized the high hopes vested in her as a symbol of renewal, contrasting starkly with her father's unpopularity. Her marriage to Leopold had brought genuine happiness, a rare find in royal unions often dictated by political necessity. Leopold's heartache from Charlotte's death affected him deeply, shaping his future despite becoming king of the Belgians. Moreover, Charlotte's death precipitated a succession crisis. George IV had no legitimate successors, and the urgency among his brothers to produce heirs led to an undignified scramble. Ultimately, it was the Duke of Kent who managed to father a daughter, Victoria, thereby positioning her as future queen and altering the course of British history. Sir Richard Croft, burdened by guilt and unyielding public scrutiny, found himself unable to cope with the aftermath. His suicide a mere 3 months after Charlotte's death illustrates the profound impact of that fateful labor, which not only claimed the life of a young princess but fundamentally shifted the royal lineage. The eventual emergence of Queen Victoria from the tragedy of Charlotte underscores the complex interplay of fate and circumstance within the annals of British history. Crowned in 1837, Victoria's reign would forge alliances and policies, indicating that the royal narrative shifted dramatically due to one dark chapter in childbirth, with Charlotte becoming a poignant symbol of loss and the fragility of succession. Born in 1864 and passing away in 1892, Prince Albert Victor, commonly known as Eddie, was the elder son of the future Edward VII and found himself both exalted and burdened by the expectations of royal lineage. As second in line to the throne, Eddie's life became a subject of speculation and concern due to ongoing discussions surrounding potential cognitive difficulties, developmental shortcomings, and the hints of scandal that clung to him like a shadow, whether based on fact or mere rumor. Eddie's persona was often characterized by charm and good looks, yet those who tutored him observed a troubling lack of intellectual engagement. Descriptions paint a picture of a young man who struggled with focus and learning. His academics were unsteady, his performance in military training marginal, and his enthusiasm for the duties of a future king minimal. In an age where heirs were expected to embody competence and intellectual rigor, Eddie appeared an anomaly, prompting the crucial inquiry of whether his challenges stemmed from genuine cognitive impairment or merely a lack of ambition and poor education. Contemptuous commentary from contemporaries often depicted him as vacantly listless, with one tutor lamenting his inability to grasp even basic reading tasks. His handwriting and academic achievements frequently fell short of the royal standard. Despite attempts at higher education at Cambridge, the results were lackluster. He reportedly gleaned little learning from his time there. His military ambitions revealed a similar trend, wherein ceremonial functions were performed adequately, yet strategic thinking eluded him completely. The air of deficiency surrounding him was exacerbated by whispers of congenital or acquired conditions, with some speculating on syphilis as a cause for decline, though evidence remains elusive. Modern scholars have sifted through historical accounts to propose explanations for Eddie's limitations. Learning disabilities such as dyslexia or the potential impact of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, might provide clarity concerning his academic trials. Other hypotheses include complications during birth leading to subtle cognitive barriers. However, the very absence of definitive diagnosis during the Victorian era leaves much to conjecture. Despite these struggles, Eddie's social persona appeared palatable. He navigated social gatherings with pleasantry, enjoying fashion and the company of friends, evading the stark label of disability in casual settings. Yet this facade faltered dramatically under the weight of royal obligations where he was evidently out of his depth. Scandals haunted him, particularly regarding unsubstantiated allegations related to the Cleveland Street scandal, casting him further into the public's dubious eye. The absurd theories linking him to the Jack the Ripper murders are illustrative of the depth of public interest and disdain that surrounded his figure. The royal family's concerns about Eddie's capability to rule accentuated his predicament, leading to plans for a prudent marriage that could uphold the kingdom's integrity. Princess Mary of Teck was chosen, a woman of intellect and fortitude who seemed apt to support Eddie's inadequacies. Their engagement signaled a hope for stability. However, fate intervened in January 1892, when Eddie succumbed to influenza-related pneumonia, a common demise before the advent of antibiotics. While his death, at merely 28, was met with public mourning befitting a prince, some family members may have privately found relief. The anxieties tied to Eddie's potential rule, a prospect fraught with doubts regarding his ability to uphold the monarchy, were laid to rest, leaving the path clear for his younger brother, George, who would ascend the throne. George, exhibiting greater reliability and aptitude, would later navigate significant historical upheavals, leading effectively through World War I and the instability of the monarchy in a rapidly changing world. The unanswered questions regarding Eddie's cognitive challenges linger, whether they were congenital, developmental, or simply a misalignment of expectation and reality, remain shrouded in historical uncertainty. Ultimately, Eddie's legacy is one that serves as a reflection of Victorian anxieties regarding royal lineage and competence. He has largely been relegated to a peripheral note in history, with the monarchy emerging more stable for his early departure. Princess Mary, originally engaged to Eddie, ultimately united with George and proved to be the exemplary queen consort they needed. Eddie's existence, overshadowed by conjecture and speculation, became a narrative reflecting more on the times than on his person. His life concluded with a modest funeral and memorial, while his brother ascended the throne, steering the monarchy into a new era. Eddie, in a sense, became a casualty of circumstance, and the royal legacy continued with George V, who would govern effectively for 25 years, leaving Eddie's brief life as a fascinating yet cautionary tale of royal expectations and the burdens they entailed. Born on January 6, 1871, and having lived scarcely a day, Prince Alexander John of Wales occupies a unique and tragic place in the annals of royal history. Unlike many of his royal contemporaries, who had the luxury of years or decades to contend with their challenges and potentially shape their legacies, Alexander John's time was limited to mere hours. The brevity of his existence was marked by a quiet tragedy, largely obscured by the Victorian royal family's stringent approach to handling such sorrows. His birth on that fateful day marked the culmination of a pregnancy that had unwarrantedly evoked feelings of hope and trepidation within the family. As the sixth child of Edward, Prince of Wales, and Princess Alexandra of Denmark, Alexander John's arrival was anticipated with a blend of expectation and anxiety, especially following the family's loss of a previous son. However, the initial joy was swiftly overshadowed by the realization that something was amiss. The official records surrounding the birth are notably sparse, revealing the Victorian tendency to overlook the intricacies of congenital anomalies in public discourse. The family, faced with the birth of a child who would ultimately not survive, swiftly interred him at Sandringham Church with minimal ceremony, a reflection of the era's uncomfortable relationship with the fragility of life and the stigma associated with birth defects. Such conspicuous silence regarding the nature of his ailment indicates a deeper anxiety about hereditary implications that could taint royal lineage. Although doctors posited potential causes, ranging from critical congenital heart conditions to severe neural tube defects, the stigma surrounding such issues kept discussion at bay. In a society preoccupied with notions of eugenics and hereditary fitness, the birth of a child with visible defects could be interpreted as a familial failure, a setback not only for the affected families but also for the larger institution of monarchy. Victorian ideals insisted that maternal losses be grieved in isolation, with public displays of sorrow viewed as unseemly. Alexandra, who had already experienced the heartache of stillbirth, was emotionally unmoored by the premature loss of a second son, yet societal expectations dictated a facade of composure in light of personal grief. Prince Edward, her husband, remained emotionally distant and engaged primarily in his own pursuits, leaving Alexandra to navigate her despair largely alone. His passing went unremarked upon politically. As the sixth in succession, Alexander John posed no threat to the stability of the monarchy, and his absence was scarcely felt outside the private sphere of family sorrow. For Alexandra, however, the impact of grief extended far beyond her role as a mother. It evoked questions about heredity and the lineage of royal blood, an exploration that the scientific understanding of the time could not adequately address. Her life would continue amid abundant family obligations and eventual joys, yet the shadows of her lost sons would persist, coloring her experiences with an enduring melancholy. The royal family's silence on the cause of Alexander John's passing reflects the complexities of their existence, navigating both public expectation and personal tragedy. While the world progressed, the family retreated into a shared grief over a life scarcely begun. Thus, the story of Prince Alexander John serves as a poignant reminder that beneath the veneer of royal privilege lies the inherent unpredictability of life itself, a truth often obscured but irrevocably present, shaping the very fabric of even the most illustrious lineages. Empress Matilda, born in 1102 and passing away in 1167, stands as a significant historical figure, often remembered not just for her rightful claim to the English throne but for the turbulent events of her life that defined a critical era in medieval Britain. As the only legitimate surviving child of Henry I, her lineage became pivotal after the tragic White Ship disaster of 1120, which extinguished the male heirs of Henry, thrusting Matilda into a unique and precarious position as his declared successor. Henry made a groundbreaking choice in nominating Matilda as his heir, a decision that defied the deeply entrenched norm of male succession. Women were not meant to ascend the throne in the early 12th century, but the frenzy of dynastic instability compelled Henry to seek a solution that favored his daughter. He pressured the barons to formally acknowledge Matilda's succession, emphasizing their oaths with a repetitious insistence that echoed the prevailing reluctance of the time. Matilda's marriage to Holy Roman Emperor Henry V, which bore no children, and her subsequent union with Geoffrey of Anjou, significantly younger yet politically motivated, yielded a trio of sons but also hints at her struggles with reproductive health. Historical records subtly underscore Matilda's potential battles with conditions like endometriosis or polycystic ovary syndrome, PCOS, both of which could have created chronic pain and complications during her pregnancies, elements rarely articulated in the male-dominated chronicles of her time. The unintended consequences of her health issues may have influenced perceptions of her suitability as a ruler. Following the death of Henry I, Matilda's path to the throne was thwarted when her cousin Stephen of Blois usurped her claims, swiftly crowned before she could counter this illegitimate claim. The barons, who had pledged loyalty to her, were swayed by a confluence of misogyny, political maneuvering, and Stephen's personal charisma, alongside possible doubts regarding Matilda's health and strength. Defying these setbacks, Matilda engaged in a protracted civil conflict known as the Anarchy, which ravaged the country for nearly 2 decades. Her brief ascendancy in 1141, when she captured Stephen, marked her as Lady of the English, albeit transiently, as missteps and fierce opposition from Stephen's supporters forced her to flee. Despite repeated attempts to solidify power for herself and her lineage, Matilda could not achieve a lasting victory, culminating in a negotiated agreement that would ultimately see her son, Henry II, ascend the throne upon Stephen's death in 1154, establishing the Plantagenet dynasty. Matilda's enduring influence was profound, representing an early assertion of female political agency in a society structured to exclude women from power. Yet, her legacy remains intricate. Her epitaph emphasizes her roles as a daughter, wife, and mother rather than as a sovereign in her own right. This could suggest her resignation to being remembered as a background figure rather than a queen, a poignant reflection of the societal constraints she navigated. The intersection of Matilda's struggles with her health and political ambitions illuminates broader themes about the influence of reproductive health on medieval nobility's expectations and realities. The historical narrative, shaped predominantly by male chroniclers, often neglected the biological dimensions that significantly informed the lives of women like Matilda. Only through thoughtful consideration of her experiences do we grasp the true complexities of her legacy, a tale of aspiration, resilience, and ultimately, a fight against systemic barriers that transcends her immediate historical context. Her life reframed the conversation around women's leadership, challenging the notion that the female body was a liability in the pursuit of power, a testament to her indomitable spirit and enduring impact on English history.